How do the Dallas Cowboys match up against the other NFC contenders? All that and more in this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can follow him on Twitter at McCoolBCB. On today's show, we're taking a look at the other contenders in the NFC. How do they stack up compared to the Cowboys? Who are the juggernauts? What does the NFC East look like? Let's start, though, Landon. We are in Halloween season, so let's talk about some boogeymen, the Michael Myers for the Dallas Cowboys. Which teams are the scariest for the Cowboys moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've got one coming up this week. It's just because of some history, right? With San Francisco, I think that they certainly kind of fell underneath this bill. To me, the big boogeymen in the NFC are Detroit. Obviously, I think have entered the conversation now after last week. Green Bay, obviously for what happened in the playoff game and so forth. And then obviously San Francisco has been the boogeyman for this team for a couple of years now. So I think to me, those are the three kind of truly scary teams for the Cowboys to have to play at any point.
Of those three, let's say the Cowboys get things turned around and they meet one of these three teams in the playoffs. Which one do you think would be the most difficult matchup for them?
It's the classic Babe Laufenberg. Tell me who's playing, because I think that's the thing that's really kind of been the changing of the fortunes for some of these teams is that, San Francisco right now is dealing with a huge rash of injuries. They've got a whole bunch of bad vibes around that offense right now. So maybe they get that turned around and they get some of those guys back. I think if you looking at these teams as fully healthy as they can be when you would play them in the playoffs. I mean, excluding any guys that we know are out for the season, like Hutchinson and that sort of thing, right?
Brandon Ayuk,
Ayuk, yeah. I would say that right now, Detroit is still the scariest team, I think, to play, just based on what we've seen so far these last few weeks. I think that they've even with the loss of Hutchinson, the defense is still playing at a high level, and that offense is probably the best in the NFL right
now. It's funny. I think my answer would be which of these three would I want to play? I think it's Detroit. And the reason is because Hutchinson's not there. Like Hutchinson was so dominant against the Cowboys that he wrecked their passing game. Without Hutchinson, I don't want to say it's easy to pass on them, but like Minnesota had no trouble at all moving the ball up and down the field. I've got to assume as the season goes on, you're going to see Detroit get a little bit more exposed on that side of the ball. It's just, can the Cowboys defense, would they be able to get any stops against Detroit? I don't know. Probably not. But I think if you stack up like Green Bay's offense and Green Bay's defense, San Francisco's offense and their defense, and Detroit's offense and their defense, Detroit's defense is probably the weakest unit of those six, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but I think the problem is that the offense is like head and shoulders above all those other units. So
I know.
That's the problem, is that the defense needs to be bad enough that it's a drag on the offense. And right now, it isn't quite that bad. It's bad, but it's worse than it was. But it's not quite bad enough to drag down the red hot Detroit offense.
Now, I want to talk about the 49ers. We're going to have the rest of the week to preview this game, Cowboys, San Francisco. But big picture here. One of the reasons why this game is so fascinating to me is that if the Cowboys are able to pull off the win.
Yeah.
I don't want to say that you completely kill Michael Myers, because you can never really kill Michael Myers, right?
He'll just sit back up here
exactly.
About, 30 minutes later.
You can get him in a tough position, right? And the 49ers, if they're 3-5 with their upcoming schedule against Buffalo, Seattle, Green Bay, like you could make it really, really hard. And you could almost make it where you're guaranteed not to see them in the playoffs. I think they are the team that's the most likely to fall out of that elite tier.
Yeah, we're at the scene in the movie where the Scream Queen finds the relic that makes the boogeyman disappear, and she realizes what she has to do. That doesn't mean that the movie ends well. It just
No.
means that we know what we have to do. And sometimes the hero gets away, and sometimes they get murdered the last second as the boogeyman pops up for one last scare. And that's certainly possible here too, right? Is that it could be that the Cowboys get into this situation with all the injuries San Francisco is dealing with, and no Christian McCaffrey, and bury San Francisco in a 3-5 record with all those teams that you just mentioned coming up. That is certainly a possibility. But I mean, you still got to go to Jason's house and find his mother and kill her. It's like it's not an easy job by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah.
You got to go to San Francisco and beat boogeyman you haven't been able to beat these last few years.
Yeah, that one's tough. Green Bay, I think Green Bay is a much better team than they were at any point last year.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't shock me of all these teams that we're talking about, the Vikings who started out 5-0, the Lions who are 5-1. If it's not Green Bay that ends up advancing to the Super Bowl, because they seem like they are the most well-balanced team in the NFC. Jordan Love has a lot of turnovers, but he's making up for big plays. They can run the ball with Josh Jacobs. Their defense, I believe, leads the NFL in turnovers.
They do.
That's a matchup that I don't think Dallas wants to see any part of right now.
No. And, look, I mean, right now they're a very high variance offense,
Yes.
you mentioned it. I think, if I'm not mistaken, as of before Monday Night Football last night, Love was leading the NFL in touchdown passes. I think he's probably second right now, right? Because I think Baker kind of retook that lead. But he also leads the league in interceptions. He's got 8 of them. The thing about
he's
that
missed
team
2 games.
Yeah, he's missed 2 games. That's the thing, is that he's missed 2 games, and he leads the league in touchdowns and in interceptions. They've got an incredibly young group of talented pass catchers. I mean, they've got Kraft, Wicks, Jacobs, Reed, Dobbs. All of these guys are I'm pretty sure not even 26 years old.
No.
So and I think that's a positive and a negative, right? You see some of the kind of rookie young player mistakes that kind of burn them sometimes, but at the same time they're so talented that they often make up for it and score a bunch of points. And you mentioned it, the defense that I think kind of surprised some folks with how well they're playing. Certainly have added a lot of defensive talent and playmakers since we played them, right? Edrin Cooper has been really, really great for them.
Xavier McKinney's been
Xavier McKinney has I think he started the season 5 straight games with an interception, if I'm not mistaken. And on top of that has a fumble recovery and then maybe even another interception.
He got a sack last week. Yep.
So yeah, I mean, they've just added playmakers. The defense is playing a lot better football than they were last year. I don't know if they're going to be able to keep up this turnover pace that they started early in the year. But I think bottom line is that you've got guys like Wicks and Clark and Gary that are all very solid players on that defensive line. You're getting really good play from your second levels and your corners. This is a good team. Like you said, very well balanced, very well coached. And I think that right now they're kind of like a young lab. He's they're excited. They don't know what to do. They're running around and they're very athletic, but it's like they can't quite focus. And once they kind of focus a little bit and remove some of the negative play aspects from this game, which I think they will, this could probably be the best team in the NFL if they can kind of sort out their shooting their own selves in the foot problem. They could be potentially a very dangerous team.
Yeah, that's the one of the 3 that I think Dallas would like to avoid at all costs. But let's talk about the NFC East, because if the Cowboys are going to make the playoffs, the best route for them to do is probably to win their division. How do the Commanders and Eagles stack up so far? We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You can get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. We've got another really good slate of NFL action here in Week 8. Go make a bet for Thursday Night Football, Rams and Vikings. And then once you make that $5 bet, whether it's the money line, the spread, or the total, you're going to get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed that you can use on anything from week 8 lines to futures bets. We're getting close to the award season, right? I love betting on the MVP. We've got a new MVP leader now in Lamar Jackson. You can go bet on Defensive Player of the Year awards. All that's available on FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. This episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals that you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, but might be open to the perfect role. In any given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We are scouting the NFC contenders. Let's go to the NFC East, Landon. So the Commanders are 5-2. The Eagles are 4-2. They've kind of steadied the ship a little bit. How do you think the Cowboys stack up to those two teams in the division?
Well, let's start with the Eagles, right? We clearly have a lot of familiarity with this kind of version of the Eagles. They added new offensive and defensive coordinators this year, with some mixed results. I think that the defense has started to kind of steady itself a little bit as they kind of fall into place a little bit, and I think that they started to get a little bit healthier, which has helped. They've gotten some youth injected into that defensive secondary, which has helped as well with Cooper DeJean and on Mitchell as well. So I think that that's kind of starting to fall into place a little bit. They still have some issues at safety. I think they still have some second level issues. And then on the opposite side of the ball, it's, they added Kellen Moore, obviously we're all very familiar with. I think that his presence hasn't really, it hasn't really changed much. It feels like in the passing game, like it still feels like they are living and dying on ISO routes on the outside. And if they can't,
YOLO balls to
YOLO
AJ
balls,
Brown.
yeah. And they're still having the issue of trying to get Jalen Hurts to kind of throw in the middle of the field or not hold on to the ball so long. And especially now that they don't have quite the offensive line that they had, in previous years. And beyond the fact that they're also dealing currently with some injuries, I think that that's become a little bit more problematic because Jalen Hurts seems to be taking a lot of sacks now. And it's like, it feels like when they throw the ball, it's like a 50-yard completion or a sack. And like, and there's almost nothing in between. The run
like
game
football
has
to 70s. It's kind of great.
Yeah, it is. It is kind of nuts. It's bringing back football to the 80s and 90s. They obviously added Saquon Barkley to the team, and I think that has kind of mitigated some of the offensive line losses in the sense that they're able to run the ball a little bit better than they have previously, just because Saquon's running it. But they still, they've taken obviously a pretty serious step back on the offensive line. Obviously losing Kelsey. Mulata is on the injured reserve currently. He's not done for the season, but he's going to be out for at least 4 games. They've kind of had a shuffling of the offensive line, which has, been noticeable for them. So I do think that with the Eagles, it just seems kind of a very familiar foe and not necessarily a big step forward or a big step back. It kind of feels like they've had some losses, they've had some games, but at the end of the day, this seems like very familiar foe that we're going to face whenever we play them. A very familiar team that we played obviously a lot and had a lot of success winning against.
The hard part is like Dallas should match up well with them because they know them so well. But at the same time, if they're going to be able to run the ball with Barkley and play, 11 on 11 football, it's going to be really hard for the Cowboys to stop them, right? Now, the Cowboys do have the corners, assuming Deron Bland can get back on the field and assuming Kalen Carson can get back, to maybe give AJ Brown and Devontae Smith some problems. But do they have the pass rush? Like, do they have the guys up front that can create pressure? Until Micah Parsons comes back, the answer is no. And even if he comes back, like who's the other guy on the other side of the field that's going to be able to do it? I don't know. Philadelphia is such a tough team to read. They have still, Landon, not scored a first quarter point this year. They're the only team in the NFL that has not scored a point in the first quarter. It feels like they are so reliant on their top end stars to carry a bad scheme, and they can do it. Like this offense looks completely different when AJ Brown's on the field, but if he's not there, they look broken. But he's healthy right now, so it's hard to say that they're not going to be a 10-win team.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, again, like, it feels like none of the angles have really changed. You know,
No.
it's very similar to the way it was last year. You know, I think they thought that an offensive coordinator would change the way that Jalen Hurts wants to play, but it really hasn't.
No.
And so I think that, you know, without and it feels like, you know, Hurts is kind of conceded to the idea that he is going to need to run the ball a little bit more than he probably feels comfortable doing. But honestly, like that's what makes him special in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And without that element, I don't know that he's a good enough pocket quarterback to kind of take this team very far. Certainly a good enough quarterback to beat you. You know, certainly a good enough quarterback to win football games. But I do think that you know, they have pretty clear, obvious weaknesses that haven't really changed very much in the last few years. So it's not a shock or a surprise on how you will beat the Eagles. It's just a matter of going out and doing it.
Let's talk about the Commanders. The Commanders are 5-2. They were up, I believe can we get it right? They were up 27-0, and they had 6 passing yards against the Panthers on Sunday. I don't know if that says more about the Commanders or more about the Panthers, but they are kind of a machine on both sides of the ball. They're creating turnovers. Dante Fowler had a pick 6 last week. Dorrance Armstrong didn't even play last week because of a rib injury, but are you buying into the Commanders as a legitimate playoff team this year?
Potentially. I mean, I here's what I think is they're doing that really no one is talking about enough, right? Is they are running the ball exceptionally well. And frankly, that's where that's the secret sauce to all of this, to be honest. That's what's keeping the defense off the field and limiting their attempts. That's what's limiting the pass attempts that Jaden Daniels has to take. I'm pretty sure they're bottom 4 in passing attempts, right? And Daniels provides a Lamar Jackson like presence in the run game, right? In the sense that he's a very, very elusive player. He's dangerous with the ball in his hands when he wants to run and design run schemes. And that opens things up even further for the run game. I tend to think, you know, after kind of going studying them a little bit more last night, the run game stuff that they're doing is just really incredible. And I think that you know, Cliff Kingsbury is getting a lot of the credit here, but I think it's Anthony Lynn who deserves some of this because the design and some of this stuff is really, really great. And then on defense, I think we're very familiar with this. You know, it's a Dan Quinn defense. I don't think they're as talented as you know, as the iterations were here in Dallas. I think that they've had a lot of kind of turnover as their offense has pressed the issue, forced teams to kind of play their hands a little bit more and press. And that has caused a lot of turnovers for them, which is not a surprising thing for a Dan Quinn defense. So I do think it's a formula that if you get them into a game script that is, you know, different than what they currently like to play in, that you probably can make them play a little bit more uncomfortable. We haven't really seen a game in which someone's forced Jaden Daniels to throw the ball a bunch to win. So I still think that that's probably the game plan that you're going to have to find a way to get to in order to kind of put Jaden Daniels in an uncomfortable spot. Is you're going to have to find a way to either get a lead or control the clock, force Washington to you know, throw the ball to move it, and, you know, shut down the run if you can, and then see if they start making mistakes. Because I think that's the other aspect. You know, it's great to have a vaunted passing offense, I guess you should say, and a great defense. But it doesn't really mean much if you turn the ball over a lot. And right now they're not turning the ball over a lot. And I think that's, you know, if you can get them into a situation where you force them to pass, they might start turning the ball over more, and then their game script kind of unravels a little bit.
So I want to preface this by saying I think Jaden Daniels is awesome. I think Dan Quinn's doing a great job. But every year we have a team or two that'll end up winning 2 to 4 games maybe than they should have because of the way the schedule lays out. And I think that's where we're at with Washington right now. They are 0-2 against teams that have a winning record this year. And in the 5 wins that they have, the combined record of those teams is 10-25. They've played the Bengals and Browns, who are 2 of the worst teams in the league. They've already played the Giants. And I would say that would be an issue if their schedule got harder coming up, Landon. But listen to some of their upcoming games. They play the Bears this week, which is a tougher game. That's a 4-2 opponent. At the Giants, home Titans, at the Saints, who are no longer the same team.
Yeah.
I mean, they play a lot of easier games coming up, and they just might be able to win all the games that they're supposed to win, split with the Cowboys, split with the Eagles, and now you're looking at a 10 or 11 win team.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly is possible. I mean, we've seen these kind of teams that, and not even just the phenomenon you just described, but we've seen offenses where you bring in a young quarterback who provides an element that's not expected, whether it's a run game aspect of it, whether it's RG3 or Jalen Hurts or any of these guys that have come in,
or Kyler Murray. Like we've seen this across the league,
where they come in and immediately make an impact, because as teams kind of scramble to figure out exactly how to defend these guys, and then once they get like a little bit of defensive coordinator focus on them, the fortunes change in the back end of the season.
Yeah.
So that certainly is something that could happen here, but I think you laid it out. This is not exactly a murderer's row for them.
No.
So there is plenty of opportunity for them, if they can kind of continue on the path that they're on, for them to win a bunch more ball games before this kind of turns around on them.
So if you just give them the games that they're favored in, going up to the Cowboys game that they play, I think it's the Sunday before Thanksgiving, there's a very realistic chance that they already have 9 wins before they play the Cowboys the first time around.
Yeah, that certainly is possible.
And that's what's tough about this is maybe if you're looking at in a power rankings, or you're looking at like DVOA, the Cowboys and Washington might be pretty close. But when you get to the records, I have a hard time thinking the Cowboys are going to get to 11 wins this year. They might be, again, they're not better than Washington right now. They might be by the end of the year, but the records might not reflect that. But that's kind of just the way the season goes. And a lot of times, Landon, that's the difference between having a first place schedule and having a fourth place schedule, which Washington has this year.
Yeah. And again, like that's, I mean, honestly, the Cowboys have been benefactors of that before, right? Like just it's the schedule is what it is. And sometimes you get the benefits of it, and sometimes you're fighting uphill the whole way. And honestly, it's not like it's one is better than the other, because there is something to the idea of fighting a very difficult battle, and being battle tested going into those games. So there's it's really just about how you get there, and getting there. And then what you do once you get there. The schedule is what the schedule is, and you can't really do anything about that.
All right, let's talk about some other NFC contenders that could potentially challenge the Cowboys for maybe a wild card spot. We will get to them next. This episode is brought to you by Gametime. Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams play live even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste your time searching through thousands of tickets. One of my favorite things about Gametime is that you're going to see a panoramic view of your seats before you buy. I love sitting in the end zone, but I don't like sitting where the goalposts are going to block my vision at all. Either like being in the corner a little bit or directly in the middle so I can see all 22 players in the field. I like watching the plays play out. I like seeing the football come at me on deep passes. It's really cool. So go check out the view on the app before you buy. Plus, they have the lowest price guarantee, or Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime Picks. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, go check out the new Locked On NFL show. 2 shows every single day. One in the morning with Tyler Rowland, one in the afternoon with Tony Wiggins. They do a fantastic job covering the league. Make sure you check it out wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube. All right, Lena, let's talk about some of the other contenders in the NFC. So if the Cowboys don't win their division, it's a pretty deep conference right now, because I think you have to assume that you're going to get at least 2 wildcard teams from the NFC North, maybe the Vikings and the Packers. And that leaves one spot for everybody else, whether that's Philadelphia, Chicago, Seattle, maybe Arizona, the Rams. Of all those teams, not including Philadelphia, which one is the scariest to you?
Give me that list one more time. You said that you just.
So it'd be like, so Chicago's 4-2.
Yeah.
Seattle's 4-3.
Mhm.
Tampa Bay is 4-3. Atlanta is 4-3. Now, obviously, somebody's going to win the South. I'm trying to think if there's anybody else. Arizona's 3-4.
Have we talked about Minnesota yet? I mean, because that's
Well,
to me.
I'm assuming Minnesota is going to win their division.
Yeah.
Or, sorry, I'm assuming Minnesota is going to be one of the wild cards.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's going to be a lot of play out in this last little spot. I honestly had Tampa kind of penciled in because they had been playing so well. Their defense really has been kind of up and down, and it feels like that is a rusting old unit that is kind of falling apart as the season goes on. But the offense have been red hot, and Baker has really had a great season so far. And then, last night happened. A disaster struck. They lose both Godwin and Evans. We don't know the severity of Evans' situation yet, but Godwin is definitely
I
out
got to
for the
believe it.
season.
There was a report in game that Evans couldn't put his shoes on. It hurt his hamstring so much.
Yeah, that's not great, man. So I think that it takes a huge, that takes the wind out of your sails pretty hardcore if you're Tampa. For Chicago, I feel like it's a lot of just, again, another variance team, right? When you have a rookie quarterback, that's kind of what happens. The fact that they're even in this conversation, I think, is a positive for that team, right?
Mm-hmm.
Obviously very young, so we'll see how that plays out. I have a feeling that they're going to come down to earth pretty mightily once they play Minnesota. And,
I don't think they've played any division games yet.
I don't think from what I've seen, just based on what I've looked at, there's been very little interdivision play in the NFC North so far. So,
well, and this is kind of the story of the NFL this year is the NFC, like the mid-range teams in the NFC are just crushing the AFC teams right now. And that's why you're getting some of these inflated records. And you look in the AFC, like there's no depth in the conference at all. I've got to assume once we start playing some of these interconference and interdivisional games, you'll see the records fall.
It's basically the inverse of what we saw last year,
yes.
right? Where the AFC had all the good teams and the NFC was getting crushed by all the middle tier AFC teams, and the AFC just didn't have enough playoff spots for all the good teams. So yeah, that's kind of reversed fortunes now. So I think that Tampa is going to really struggle at this point if they're going to lose some of their offensive firepower, because it was barely enough to kind of keep their defense afloat. And so I have a feeling that they're going to struggle for the next few weeks.
I got their schedule real quick.
Mm-hmm.
Home against Atlanta this week. They already lost to Atlanta once. Yep. At Kansas City, home 49ers next 3 games.
Yeah, that's brutal. I mean, even with the 49ers, dealing with all the injury stuff. Chicago, we just talked about. Seattle, I just don't know, man. Like, what's this? Did DK Metcalf get hurt? Is he?
They said it's a minor MCL injury, but they played Buffalo this week, so they very well could be 4-4 after 8 games.
Yeah, I just can't get a good read from them. Like, it feels like they have a decent running attack at times. Geno Smith kind of has come down to earth a little bit from what we saw last year, but he's still playing pretty decent football. But it feels like that they're struggling to kind of consistently at times string things together on the offensive side of the ball. And the defense, it feels like they're starting to pull it together. I still think that Seattle's maybe a year away, right? But they could easily turn things around. All they need to do is get a big win over San Francisco, and maybe things congeal behind your new coach, and maybe they are the ones who come out of the West if San Francisco starts to crater a little bit. So it certainly is possible.
Yeah, they're interesting. I think of all those teams, I think Atlanta's going to win the South, right? So that means you have Tampa Bay competing for a spot. You have Chicago. I think Chicago, I like them, but there's a chance they just go 1-5 in the division, right? Because their division's so good. Seattle's the one for me, right? Because I do like their talent. I think the defense is going to get better. It's just, can they figure out ways to beat the 49ers? They just got crushed like 10 days ago against San Francisco. I don't know. But
well, I mean, if they could run the football the way that they
Yeah.
have been, San Francisco's really, really struggled to stop the run,
Yeah.
which is,
So
very unusual for them. So
here's my fear. I think we're going to get where it's 2 NFC North wildcard teams. Let's say it's Green Bay and Minnesota, and then Philly is your third wildcard team at like 10 wins. Dallas is going to basically have to beat Philly both games if they're going to want to sneak into the wildcard spot.
yeah, I think that's probably what it is. It's going to be interesting to see exactly how the bottom of that whole wild card situation shakes out these next few weeks.
Yeah. All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out the new Locked On NFL show. 2 shows every single day, available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. You can download our podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Check us out on YouTube, Locked On Cowboys. Follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus _Mosier, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.